The latest Fede Álvarez film, Alien Romulus, has debuted to over $100 million globally. So it's time to stop and rank all 4 Fede Álvarez films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of Fede Álvarez's films. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. As we go into this, I've done a bunch of other director rankings: Scorsese, Tarantino, Spielberg, and many, many, many more. If you like this type of content, be sure to check out that playlist wherever it is at whenever this video is over with, and let's get started. In last place, The Girl in the Spider's Web. This movie is perfectly mediocre, and what I mean by that, it's not bad. It's put together well enough, it delivers enough solid beats, but it just kind of sits there right in the middle. It's never good enough or bad enough, really, to be interesting. And so you have a film that, while you're watching it, you're entertained enough, but it doesn't really stick with you. All of the elements about Fincher's film that made it distinct inside of this genre. I think my dog wants out. All of the elements which made Fincher's film distinct inside of the thriller genre have been sidelined for more action and a more streamlined plot. It's never able to escape what it essentially is: a downgraded requel to a big, well-received David Fincher film. For years, they were talking about and planning on making a sequel to Fincher's film, and then enough time passed that they essentially decided, let's just do a new adaptation of the book series, but this time with a smaller budget, and adapting not one of the original books from the original author, but a new book from a new author. The original author of the series passed away, and a decade later, a new author kind of started writing new stories in the series. And that's the book that was adapted. And to be clear, I haven't read the book, so I don't want to misrepresent myself in any sort of way as an expert on the series. But the original author was a journalist, and that was one of the distinctive things he brought to his books in the series, where one of our 2 leads is a journalist, the Daniel Craig character in the David Fincher film. And in this movie, which is an adaptation of a book from a new author that was not a journalist, that character's role is diminished. It's not as distinct, and the perspective shifts from kind of being this thriller told from the perspective of a journalist to being a much more straightforward revenge thriller of sorts, espionage thriller from the perspective of the Lisbeth character. We've seen that movie many times before. It doesn't add anything new, and it never escapes feeling like the cheapy version of something better, where we go from Daniel Craig to this other guy playing the character that I don't know who this other guy is. So you always feel that. It's always obvious that this is a movie that didn't have as big of a budget and wasn't treated as seriously as the previous films. Fede is a competent director that in particular knows how to stage sequences so the action is thrilling. In particular, there's several sequences with some nice dynamic camera work that kind of brings things to life, but the depth of story, characterization, that's really what made The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo pop. The story and the script just come off too straightforward. Even the twists and turns with Lisbeth and her family and ties to things, they just kind of feel thrown in. They don't actually mean all that much to the grander story or pay anything off for a character arc. And so just a movie that it's fine while you're watching it, but I also would never just choose to go and rewatch it. And to be perfectly clear, number 4 on the list, easily in last place, big gap, and then we get to the top 3, and there's no real gap between any of them. Different day of the week, my ranking will be different here. Each and every one of them have something about the movie that kind of makes me excited that it exists. But I also feel like with each one of these movies, I would feel weird putting any of them in third, but none of them feel distinctly like the one that belongs in first place. I feel like I want to put all 3 of these movies in second place. But It's a ranking. I'm not allowed to do that. So as for today, here is my ranking that I almost certainly will not stand by next week. In third, because I have to play something in third, Evil Dead. Now, the original Raimi trilogy has a very special place in my heart. All throughout the late 90s, I was obsessed with those films. I quoted Army of Darkness on loop. And so when this movie came out, after the zeros where so many horror films were remade, I went into this movie pretty cynical. So it did take me a little while to come around to the film just because I did have that obnoxious fanboy cynicism. But as soon as I watched this movie on its own merits, this is how you remake a movie properly, where it doesn't try to overly complicate the plot, the simple setup of the original, but it adds just a few new additions into the mix. It stays true to all the classic elements, but it adds in this plot line about drugs, why they're staying a little bit longer than would probably make sense. It adds in just enough of that. The withdrawal would add some crazy behavior that would be misinterpreted. Like, there's little things that you go, oh, that's kind of a nice little touch. Okay, that makes sense as to kind of what's going on here. And then kind of likewise adds a little bit more depth to the characters because of that, their dynamics, their old friendships. Nothing overly complicated that feels out of place, but just little touches to add something fresh into the mix. And then from there, you get the Fede Álvarez gnarly practical effects, where in an era where everyone else was going CGI,
I knew on day one there was going to be practical effects, and that's what I do, right? That's what I do on Evil Dead. Like, whenever I was doing CG gore all over, I was like, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to do practical stuff.
He stayed practical, and he went gnarly and nasty on so many different levels. And what he's so good at is putting you in an environment and finding every nasty thing that could happen to a person, everything that would be a vulnerability for people, and he exploits it, and he keeps doubling down, so you just feel uncomfortable, tense, and it's nasty because it feels and it looks so real. And he's able to have a bunch of just iconic images in here, finds ways to kind of play around with the mythology, the hand cut off, the chainsaw, and just not just rehash what came before, but finds a fun way to bring it back into the mix. Now, it is a little bit, as the lifelong fan, so much of what you love about the originals is kind of that low-budget, amateur-ish rawness to it. It's like pure creativity, and this has slickness to it. It's a professional production with a budget. Just to give some reason as to why it's third, not higher up, I imagine just some of it is just kind of my love for that Raimi-esque nature of the original ones, and this one maybe just a little bit too slick, a little bit too professional in a sense. I'm really just making excuses. I have to have some reason it's in third. Our runner-up, Don't Breathe. I was late to the party on this one. I wasn't able to see it in a theater. Actually watched it for the first time in this movie back when this was my movie watching room and not my office and studio. But I would have loved to have been able to see this movie with a packed theater and just experience a bunch of people holding their breath while characters walk through rooms. Anyway, I think this movie is a perfect example of what Fede Álvarez is so good at. These isolated horror thrillers, pressure cooker films with characters trapped in an environment, and he just does a great job of introducing you all to all the elements that make our characters vulnerable, all the ways they might be able to escape, everything that might go wrong. Early on, as they're scoping out the house, you see the weapons, the glass, the hammers, the locks, the mysteries. Like, it's all straightforward and simple, but he establishes the rules. You understand the maze that these characters are in. And then we get introduced to the blind man, who's just this great antagonist in the film. Because at first, you just think, oh, he's a really brutal guy, but hey, people broke into his house. They had it coming. And then as we go throughout the movie and we realize what he's been up to, you're like, whoa, this guy's really twisted. But like all great villains, he thinks he's the hero of his story. the most disturbing, villainous things that he does is morally justified in his own brain. And that's when you have someone that's a compelling antagonist or villain. I mean, really in this movie, there's no one to root for. You're just in a scenario that's compelling and interesting to watch. How are they going to navigate their way out of this? And what will that resolution be? I think it just does such a great job of taking a simple premise, putting you in an environment, making this immersive film, or even watching it at home by myself. I'm like holding my breath in certain moments, just waiting to see what's going to happen, despite the fact that I've seen the movie before. That's how you know that they've done a great job with the film. But coming in at number one, at least for today, is Alien Romulus. Certainly, it could be recency bias. I've seen the movie twice in the last week. First time I had some reservations about it. Second time solidified it that I thought that this was a great Alien experience. And it's the Alien movie I've kind of been waiting for, basically since I first saw the movie Aliens and wanted a worthy follow-up to the first two films. Fede Álvarez takes that skill set we've talked about in all the other films, applies it to the Alien franchise, where you introduce elements, gravity, temperature, xenomorph biology, all these different ingredients where the audience knows everything that can go wrong. And also following along with the Chekhov's gun type of set of rules, it introduces us to all these things. Gravity, pregnant person, and you know that's going to come back to haunt our characters later in the movie, that just kind of sets you like in this constant sense of tension and unease, waiting for things to go wrong, knowing that you are never going to be safe until the credits are rolling. There's a fantastic production design that just takes you back to the world of the first two Alien films. Love the practical effects, the use of the classic retro future analog technology, the sound effects. It just, all of it feels right, and then delivers the thrills, the edge of your seat that you want from a movie like this, and finds new things to do with it, with the elevator shaft, the gravity sequence, that just play a little bit different, that you're continuing to deliver a great Alien thriller. But even beyond that, it could just be a great sci-fi horror film at the same time. And for that reason, despite having some things I'm not crazy about in the film, what's the movie of his that I think I will rewatch the most, have the biggest impact, that like sticks out in my brain? I think it's this one at this moment. We'll see how time changes my opinion on the film, but after two viewings, it's coming in at number one. If you like these type of videos, you can check out my other director rankings over there in that playlist. I've done James Wan, I've done Tarantino, Scorsese, Spielberg, Shyamalan, many, many, many more right over there. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.